Hey, Horse Center fans, Matt and I are back after an exciting edition of the Breeders' Cup. Matt, what are we talking about this week?
Let's wrap up the Breeders' Cup, Brian, with some of our favorite performances, favorite storylines, Eclipse Award implications.
All sorts of Breeders' Cup talk right here on Horse Center. We got Vino Rosso, Matali, Bricks and Mortar, and much more. Watch it all right now on Horse Center. Welcome to another edition of Horse Center, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I have the outstanding pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm good, Brian. We're post Breeders' Cup, and the clocks fell back, and here we are on Horse Center.
The weather's turning cold, and the Breeders' Cup 2019 has come and gone, Matt. But it's not completely over. I'll tell you why. Because today on Horse Center, Matt and I are going to talk about the best of the Breeders' Cup 2019. There's plenty to celebrate, a little bit to commiserate. But Matt, let's start with the classic. I don't often like to toot our horns, and certainly we were wrong about enough races not to toot our horns too high. But we were both on the third choice, the winner, Vino Rosso in the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah, we were, Brian. We were on Vino Rosso. Going back to our very first Breeders' Cup show when we did the Horses to Beat and Dark Horse show, Brian. Vino Rosso was our horse to beat, and we got a good price on Vino Rosso. You got to take your hat off to Todd Pletcher in here, because what a training performance over a career. With a horse like Vino Rosso, who was in and out a lot early in his career, and even a little bit this year, and he just got better and better, and he won the Classic convincingly.
Yeah, he always looked like a mile and a quarter horse to me, Matt, and I never quite agreed with you that he was in and out a lot. I think there were races where he just he was a plotter, he was a grinder, and he just wasn't talented enough to get there. But I think when they turned him around was when they got him more involved early in the races, and yeah, he improved enough. And let's face it, this was not a great Breeders' Cup Classic field that he was beating, but he did it in such a way to really stamp himself as the best distance dirt horse in America. Vino Rosso, he won. He finished first. Let's say that, Matt, because I'm still a little bit ticked off about that Jockey Club Gold Cup disqualification, which I never thought should have happened. But 4 of 6, he finished first. The Jockey Club, of course, got taken down. So the official record will say 3 of 6. In the race, yeah, I was rooting for Vino Rosso. When you said we've been on Vino Rosso, I thought you were going to say since the Tampa Bay Derby of 2018. Because I've literally bet Vino Rosso pretty much every single race for his last, I don't know, 10 or 12 now, and it paid off pretty well. We saw him go by McKinsey. His really competition early in the stretch, at least, was McKinsey. And Matt, if you remember, about 12 years ago, Curlin and Street Sense and all the battles they had. This was a son of Curlin and a son of Street Sense. No doubt, though, that the son of Curlin, Vino Rosso, trained by Todd Pletcher, was best.
Yeah, that's for sure, Brian. And it capped a pretty fantastic Breeders' Cup for jockey Irad Ortiz, who had 4 winners over the 2 days, and to cap it off in the Classic was quite a performance. Actually, Brian, the East Coast jockeys, the New York jockeys, just absolutely dominated the Breeders' Cup with 12 wins out of the 14 races.
Yeah, Ortiz finished that Breeders' Cup with a flourish, that's for sure, on Saturday. So clearly Irad Ortiz was the jockey of the Breeders' Cup this year. Matt, we do have some very disturbing, sad news, of course, coming out of that Classic when Mongolian Groom broke down. And Mongolian Groom was a long shot in the Breeders' Cup Classic. But as the winner of the Awesome Again, a horse that beat McKinsey in the last race, really devastating news to see him break down there early in the stretch. Unfortunately, he could not be saved. So we did, after a very healthy Breeders' Cup for the first 13 races, Unfortunately, we lost a very nice horse in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Obviously, the health and safety of these horses has to come first. I've seen some positive changes this year. We need to do more, and we need to keep working as an industry to make sure that things like this are as limited as possible. I've seen, ever since I watched on TV in my living room Ruffian break down so many years ago. It's shocking, and I think to a point, Matt, I don't want to stray from our Breeders' Cup show too much, but I think to a point I've almost become a little desensitized to it, and almost to a point where it's not so shocking, and I think that needs to change.
Yeah, I think that is certainly true for most racing fans, and I think it will be impossible to ever completely do away with things like this happening. I mean, this year at the Breeders' Cup, particularly with the number of horses that were scratched a couple days before, and then even the day of their Breeders' Cup event, because the veterinarians saw just something, as slight as it might have been, to turn on a yellow light. Obviously, they didn't see that at all with Mongolian Groom, but these things are going to happen.
Yeah, and Vino Rosso, Matt, that's for me, he was the biggest star because of his performance in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I think you're going to differ on my feeling on that soon enough in this show, but Vino Rosso really came through in a big way in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Now my question to you is he an Eclipse Award champion?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Has he done enough, having just won the biggest race of the Breeders' Cup of the weekend? Has he done enough to win the Older Dirt Male Award, who he will have to get more votes than Matali in there? It's a good question. I mean, clearly, I think overall Matali has a better record in terms of the number of wins, but it's a sprinter versus a classic distance horse. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that vote.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot in a minute here, Matt, but let's talk about Matali a little bit, because certainly he was one of the most outstanding horses that competed in this Breeders' Cup. Matali came into the Breeders' Cup 5 for 6. He was awfully good as a 3-year-old before he lost the second half of the year due to injury, but he was a revelation in 2019 for trainer Steve Asmussen. He won races up to 1 mile. Of course, that 1 mile win came in the very important Metropolitan Handicap. That Met Mile win kind of fueled the fire from Matali to be discussed as the best older dirt male in the country. And certainly in the Breeders' Cup, he did nothing to dissuade people who want to see that happen. Unfortunately, Imperial Hint was one of the horses scratched Breeders' Cup week, which took away from the race just a little bit, but still a good field, and Matali was much the best.
Yeah, he certainly was, and no doubt that scratch of Imperial Hint affected the race to some degree, but that's what happened, Brian.
That's what happened. And Matt, it looked like, despite, I should have mentioned this earlier, because I think Santa Anita did make good strides to make their racing surface safer than it used to be. But it looked like speed was pretty good in the Breeders' Cup in general, whether we're talking about turf or dirt. Not every day, not every race. There were horses that were able to rally and win, but it looked like speed was good. And Chance-a-Lot, as we thought he might do, was out there wigging on the lead, and it was up to Matali to run him down. So really a strong performance by Matali, obviously our best sprinter in the country in 2019. Now I wonder, though, Matt, he never ran 2 turns. He's got the sprinter award. Doesn't that kind of mean Vino Rosso, as the traditional older dirt male kind of horse, the traditional handicap horse of years past, if you will, who won his races at the classic distance of 1.25 miles? The Stymie wasn't 1.25 miles, but the Jockey Club where he was taken down, the Gold Cup at Santa Anita, now the Breeders' Cup Classic, all classic distances of 1.25 miles. Doesn't that tip the scales in favor of Vino Rosso, despite not being the 6 of 7 for the year like Matali?
I think traditionally it does, Brian, but I think Matali is going to get the award, and I think he's going to get the award because of that net mile that you mentioned. That was a fantastic field in there. It was a mile, so he's won this year from 6 furlongs to a mile, and that shows some versatility. If he didn't have that Met Mile win in there, I think Vino Rosso would get it. But when the ballots are counted, I think Matali is going to be the older dirt male also, because there are a lot of people who are still out there talking about Matali as Horse of the Year.
Yeah, Matali is a Horse of the Year candidate. He'll be one of the 3 finalists for the Horse of the Year. And I think Vino Rosso very well may still be one of the 3 candidates, the top 3 candidates for Horse of the Year, but that's another question as well. All right, so Matt says Matali's going to get 2 Eclipse Awards, strengthened by his big Breeders' Cup win. I'm going to say Matali gets the Sprinter of the Year, and Vino Rosso is the older dirt male of the year. We will see how that unfolds in a few months. For me, though, the question of Horse of the Year, really, the door was closed for the Breeders' Cup. I don't consider Matali, Vino Rosso, or Midnight Bisou any longer as a real threat. I think Bricks and Mortar, Breeders' Cup Turf winner, Matt, is our 2019 Horse of the Year.
Well, absolutely, Brian. Absolutely. I think that Bricks and Mortar's performance in the Breeders' Cup Turf was one of the best performances that I remember in the Breeders' Cup in the last several years. This is Bricks and Mortar. Remember, it was his first try going 12 furlongs, going the 1.5 miles. And hey, Brian, I don't think people are talking about it enough, but Bricks and Mortar did not have a good trip in that race. He had a very difficult trip in terms of the running style that we are used to with Bricks and Mortar, sitting on the outside, getting a nice relaxing trip, getting into stride, making a move, and winning the race. That did not happen. That did not come close to happening, as right out of the gate, he got hemmed in on the inside a pack of 4 or 5 horses, and had to run that way almost the entire race. In that situation, he didn't relax by any means. He was difficult to handle. He was a little bit rank. Irad Ortiz had to check him at one point because he almost went up on the heels of a horse in front of him. But through all of that, Ortiz sat there, and coming around the final turn, it even looked, and Chad Brownsley himself said it, at that point, he was really worried because he began to lose ground in there because that pack of horses was losing ground in there. But eventually, Irad got out, got a small opening, took him to the outside, and made the move to get the win. And conventional wisdom always it has been, Brian, don't bet on a horse at short odds doing something that they've never done before. And that was Bricks and Mortar. And he countered that wisdom and won the race impressively. I thought just a tremendous, tremendous performance.
Yeah, it's a tremendous performance. For me, it wasn't the performance of the Breeders' Cup or certainly the performance of the last several years of the Breeders' Cup, for one simple reason. I think this was the weakest field. The Breeders' Cup Turf this year was one of the weakest that I can remember seeing. I've seen a few weak ones, so I wouldn't say it was the weakest I've ever seen. But it was a weak field, Matt. Remember the horse that he was battling to the wire to beat here was a horse named United, and United by no means is a world beater. Last year, for instance, Enable came, and in years past, there's been really good American horses and especially really good European horses. That didn't happen this year. I will agree with you, though. It was brave. There were some horses in here who didn't have the trip that they wanted, and Bricks and Mortar was one of them. Yeah, I agree. And it made it all the more brave and kind of championship clinching that he did it at 1.5 miles. I think that's key, and I think that's key to your argument that despite a mediocre at best trip, he he really dug down deep and got it done at a distance far farther than he's ever run before. He'd never been farther than 10. So for him to win at 12, yeah, great performance, Bricks and Mortar. Great string of wins for Bricks and Mortar. Hey, the son of Giants Causeway was off for 14 months, Matt Schiffman. 14-month layoff. They thought he'd never race again. Owner, trainer were patient. Veterinarian did some magic. And look at him, 14 months off, and he comes back and he wins his last 7 races. 6 for 6 this year. Not only 6 for 6, but frankly, the biggest turf races for males in this country from January up until November. He won the big ones. He won the Arlington Million. He won the Manhattan. He won the Pegasus World Cup Turf. He won the Breeders' Cup Turf. Horse of the Year. We don't have a lot of turf horses as Horse of the Year in America, but Bricks and Mortar is our Horse of the Year. The son of Giants Causeway will be headed to Japan to begin his stallion duty there, Matt. Wish he would stay in America, but 7 straight wins. What a way to go out.
Yeah, he was like the $6 million man, Brian. They rebuilt him. And when they rebuilt him, he came out and he was a superhero.
Yeah, Lee Majors playing Steve Austin, you say. I'm not, okay, I'll go with it. I was really impressed with Chad Brown's other winner of the day. He had 3 winners overall, but his other Breeders' Cup winner of the day, because I thought the turf course was playing a little bit more to speed. And you know me, Matt, I've been a Got Stormy fan for a while now, and I really thought this was her race to win. And she came through for me. She ran her race. But unfortunately, behind her, and so early, that's what struck me, Matt. Uni was there when they straightened out, and I said, oh, wow, Got Stormy's running, but she can't hold off Uni. And sure enough, Got Stormy fought her for a while, but Uni was just a runaway freight train. She had all the momentum in the world. Uni hasn't lost a lot of races in America, but this was her best performance yet. The females ran 1-2 in the Breeders' Cup Mile.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And you're right, Brian. Uni hasn't lost many races here in North America. I think maybe only 1 race. And Uni's last race was really terrific. Chad had the horse coming into her best. It was a fantastic ride by Joel Rosario in terms of, as you talked about, the pace and having his horse in the right position. She was way out on the outside coming out of the gate. One of those things where 2 great fillies taking on the boys, and Uni got the best this time, but great story.
Yeah, Uni Got Stormy, much to my dismay, Got Stormy was only second best, but Uni deserved the victory here, that's for sure. Matt, she's 3 of 4 this year. She only ran 4 times, 3 of 4. Got Stormy beat her in the 1 race she lost this year. Sister Charlie was beaten in the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Turf. She's 3 for 4 this year. So that really kind of opens the door for some discussion there as far as who is our top turf female. Certainly Got Stormy will finish 3rd in that race, but Sister Charlie or Uni, does the Breeders' Cup win carry the day?
That's the interesting question, because that is Uni's only Grade 1 win this year, is that Breeders' Cup Mile. For Sister Charlie, as we know, all of her wins were Grade 1s. So I guess it's going to come down to some of the voters who are Grade 1 counters, as opposed to Uni winning the mile and beating the boys and beating Got Stormy. That might be one of the closest votes this year.
I'm not sure, but I think that Keeneland win may have been Grade 1. We'll have to check on that at some point. But I think maybe her last 2 races were Grade 1.
Okay.
Anyway, that'll be an interesting question. I think the Breeders' Cup may actually get Uni the award, both trained by Chad Brown, over Sister Charlie. But Sister Charlie, hard to look past her, even though she didn't get it done in the Filly and Mare Turf. Speaking of getting it done, Matt, this is horse racing. I am so wrong about Covfefe. I watched Covfefe win an allowance race at Keeneland earlier this year, and I remember thinking, she won, but she seems a little overrated to me. And then she ran that huge race. Saratoga, the test was great. And she ran that huge race against not a lot of competition at Churchill Downs. And I thought, okay, she just shot her wad, and she's going to bounce against the best female sprinters going 7 furlongs in the Breeders' Cup. Covfefe, I underestimated her all year long, and she proved me very wrong.
Yeah, I think I was in that boat with you too, Brian, where I kind of felt that way about her races. But I guess Brad Cox has a real talent in being able to keep horses going and keep horses advancing and keep them winning all throughout a pretty lengthy campaign, as he did with Monomoy Girl last year. So Covfefe just kept doing it, and this time rallied from off the pace to get it done in the Breeders' Cup, which was a new way to win for her.
Yeah, and you could tell at the top of the stretch that she was going to roll. She wasn't far off the pace, but she was relaxed early, and she let things unfold right in front of her, and she pounced, and she is, by all accounts, a runaway winner of the female sprint division. She will be a champion, and well-deserved. Brad Cox got 2 wins. Talk about an up-and-coming trainer. I guess he's already come. Brad Cox now with Monomoy Girl, a champion of last year, and Covfefe and British Idiom, the 2-year-old filly juvenile fillies champion. So Brad Cox. Matt, one of my favorite stories of this Breeders' Cup was actually Belvoir Bay, and she was my long shot pick. I bet her in here. I won some money on here. But bigger story, I think, is that she's a survivor, Matt. She's a survivor of the San Luis Rey fires, Matt, and she's also a horse that hadn't run for just about half a year. Belvoir Bay returns fresh for trainer Peter Miller. We got to talk Peter Miller when we talk turf sprint, but Belvoir Bay survived the fire, and she's a Breeders' Cup winner.
Yeah, that just, discussing the fire part of the story makes it a really special win. Hey, Belvoir Bay was one of our dark horse picks back on that Breeders' Cup show, Brian. 14-1 in here. I don't know. I think that was a little light. I think maybe we expected a bigger price on that, but I guess people were seeing the Peter Miller name on there. This is now the 3rd year in a row that Peter Miller has won the turf sprint. It's his 5th Breeders' Cup victory. The other 2 also came in sprints in the dirt sprint. So I guess folks remember that little ditty in future Breeders' Cup. Pay attention to whoever Peter Miller is putting in these races.
Yeah, and don't forget Peter Miller ran 2nd in here as well, with Ohm winning that photo for 2nd. So Peter Miller 1-2. Great story for Belvoir Bay, the 6-year-old mare. She was sold yesterday at the Keeneland November sale. So it looks like her career is over. What a way to go out for Belvoir Bay. And speaking of good ways to go out, how about Blue Prize, the Argentinian mare? At one point, we saw Alate really handle her pretty simply at Churchill Downs, and then Alate blew her out at Delaware in the Delaware Handicap. But Blue Prize got good at the right time, and she got the job done at the Breeders' Cup Distaff.
Yeah, and hats off to first-time Breeders' Cup victories to jockey Joe Bravo and trainer Ignacio Correas with this filly who throughout her career has been a little bit quirky, a little bit hard to handle in the barn, a little bit hard to handle on the racetrack, but all the pieces came together in the distaff. Odds almost 9-1 in there, and then the horse went through the sales ring the other day, and cha-ching, Brian, bringing a price of $5 million.
Not bad money if you could get it. Good timing, I guess, on the sale of this Argentinian mare. And Matt, of course, we remember the trip she took to win last year. Spinster was a wild one. But she ran well in the Breeders' Cup Distaff last year. She ran better this year, and she beat Midnight Bisou. Midnight Bisou may have been a little farther back than we expected, Midnight Bisou was 7 for 7 this year coming into the race. Midnight Bisou will be an Eclipse Award winner, but no chance now for the Horse of the Year for her.
That's for sure. Yeah, was a little bit too far back on a racetrack that you described earlier as a bit speed favoring, maybe not biased, but a bit speed favoring. And I think Mike Smith had the horse just too far back.
Yeah. All right, so that's our biggest stories from Saturday, Matt. Let's go backwards one day. Friday, the juveniles, and for me, maybe tearing at the heartstrings just a little bit. The best story for me of the 2-year-olds was watching Graham Motion, one of the nicest, classiest trainers in the country, win with Sharing. Sharing was another long shot that we gave out here on HorseCenter. But Sharing is a daughter of Shared Account, and of course, Graham Motion won the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf years ago with Shared Account as a bigger long shot than her daughter. Now we come full circle, same trainer, the daughter of Shared Account, Sharing, a really nice-looking young turf filly, wins the juvenile fillies turf.
Yeah, it was the 2010 Filly and Mare Turf, Brian. So almost 10 years ago. Manny Franco, the jockey, got his first Breeders' Cup win, had a really good Breeders' Cup, got, I think, a second in one of the other races. And like you said, for Graham Motion, who this was his fourth Breeders' Cup win, class act all the time. So, and you know, an outspoken figure in the horse racing world. He's not afraid to speak up and say what he thinks should be going on and changes that should be made. And maybe we need more people like him.
It's hard not to like Graham Motion. It's hard not to feel good about the mother-daughter Breeders' Cup double for the English-born trainer. So that was Sharing. Now, you wanted to talk about the male turf of the juveniles a little bit, didn't you, Matt?
Yeah, and that was Chad Brown's first win of this Breeders' Cup. Structor, who is a son of Palace Malice, not that long ago, retired. I think this is his first crop, I think. So feathering his cap in there. It was Jose Ortiz getting his win in the Breeders' Cup on Structor, and I bring him up particularly because they are talking about, Chad Brown is talking about in 2020 giving this one a try on the dirt and maybe heading out on the Derby trail.
Yeah, and I thought that was why you wanted to talk about Structor. It was a nice win, and he is America's best 2-year-old turf horse. We thought he very well could win this race for Chad Brown, one of his 3 winners, the first of his 3 winners, as you said. But the Kentucky Derby, that's interesting. And it's interesting now that the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf has become a bit of a classic preview, if you will. Horses like Mendelssohn and War of Will ran in this race, and now right after the race, Chad Brown said, "Yeah, we're gonna see if he's a Kentucky Derby horse or not." So interesting to see where the career of Structor goes after his Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf win. Matt, I did want to mention a few other things. British Idiom, we already mentioned her. It was a nice, hard-fought win. She got a little bit slow time. We don't know exactly what that means or if she is the best 2-year-old filly heads and tails this year, but she's a champion, having won a big race at Keeneland and then the Breeders' Cup, 3 for 3 now for trainer Brad Cox. Also wanted to mention the job that the sire, I don't know if that's the right word, the job of the sire, American Pharoah, speaking of first crop sires, American Pharoah did with his first crop, because he had I don't know how quiet it was or not quiet, but American Pharoah had a really nice Breeders' Cup break from the gate with his first crop on Friday.
Yeah, that's for sure. In the very first Breeders' Cup drive, four-wheel drive, just as you're supposed to do in the turf sprint, right out of the gate, right to the front, and wire-to-wire win for Wesley Ward, who's now talking about that horse that son of American Pharoah is one of his leading candidates to take over to Royal Ascot this year. Yeah, and it seems like American Pharoah has done the most so far with horses racing on the turf, but they're only 2-year-olds now, Brian. And I think in our country there are a lot of trainers now that are far more willing to put their young horses on the grass. It's a little bit easier on them early on. So we'll see, as there'll be late bloomers coming out as we start talking about the Derby Trail and seeing more about that. And we'll see if there's some American Pharaohs left to still debut on the dirt that might make some noise.
Absolutely, Matt. And Wesley Ward and Royal Ascot, we would expect nothing less from Wesley Ward. American Pharoah had 3 horses that made the Breeders' Cup this year. They ran first, third, and third in 2 respective juvenile races. So great to see American Pharoah. One of his greatest qualities, among many, I think, was his disposition, Matt, and that's huge for a thoroughbred racehorse. And if he can pass on not only his some of his running ability, but also that disposition, that will do American Pharoah offspring well for sure. Last thing we should mention is the juvenile long shots. You had 45 to 1, 28 to 1, 37 to 1, something like that, run 1, 2, 3 in the juvenile. Dennis's moment went down to his knees and never really ran much after that. I thought 8 Rings and Scabbard were very disappointing because they had no excuses in the race. I think the best thing that came out of this race, Matt, was the post-race interview where the television personality Brittany Erden got to interview her father, who's the trainer of Storm the Court, the winner of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, after the race. Just a really nice moment between Brittany Erden and Father Peter Erden, the trainer of Storm the Court.
Yeah, that's for sure. And hey, that's a big part of horse racing. There are so many families and generation to generation affairs in horse racing, which is one of the big positives about the sport that you and I have enjoyed for so many years.
So many years, so many decades. I don't know if I'm talking about us being fans of horse racing or HorseCenter right here on YouTube, Matt, but we've enjoyed the ride either way you look at it. Matt, can I get a parting shot from you on our Best of the Breeders' Cup show today?
Absolutely, Brian. I do want to thank the HorseCenter audience. A lot of you watched the shows, and we heard from some of you that did really well at the windows, and for that we are thankful. We've got the holidays coming up. We've got some great racing coming up. The traditional races over Thanksgiving weekend. We've got Eclipse Awards, and I don't know. Do we have to wait till January 1st, Brian, to say we're on the Derby Trail?
We never do, Matt. Why would we start this year? Thanks to all you folks who watched, and thanks to the many nice messages Matt and I got. We sure do appreciate it. We had our viewership spike up, as it always does, for the Breeders' Cup month, and we greatly appreciate you. And we hope that you become loyal watchers of HorseCenter, because Matt and I are here every week doing what we love, talking horses. Thanks also to our producer, Brett Workman. I think Brett had some winning tickets at the Breeders' Cup, Matt, so that's nice to hear. And also thank you to our sponsor, the best contest site out there. That's Derby Wars. Folks, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel here on Horse Racing Nation, please do so now. It's that little red button there on the bottom right. And Matt, as we leave HorseCenter for this week, and we kind of close the book on the Breeders' Cup 2019, I do want to take one more look back. We're going to trail off. We're going to watch Mongolian Groom, his really big win. It came the race before the Breeders' Cup. It was the Awesome Again, and the horse running second, of course, was McKinsey. So let's watch Mongolian Groom one last time.
Goes in. All set. And they're off in the Awesome Again. Higher Power stumbled at the start. McKinsey comes out beautifully and takes the lead. Mongolian Groom is up close in the early going, and Isotherm on the far outside. Just behind them, it's Draft Pick in fourth, then Seeking the Soul, and Higher Power will try to overcome that beginning. He's climbing a bit at the back of the field. Mongolian Groom goes on with it to set the tempo. He's in front by a half length to Isotherm in third. Is McKenzie 2.5 lengths off the pace, and Draft Pick is down at the rail. Higher Power in between horses, only about 2 lengths off the pace, and Seeking the Soul. You cannot get any more compact than this. McKenzie 3 wide. Mongolian Groom is still in front, though, and Isotherm second. McKenzie galloping along smoothly with 5/8 of a mile to travel. Draft Pick, Higher Power between rivals, has 3 to make up, and Seeking the Soul in the yellow sleeves. There's a half mile to go in the Awesome again. Mongolian Groom has been there every step of the way. Isotherm pressing him second. Draft Pick on the inside third. McKenzie joined by Higher Power, about 3 lengths off the leader, and Seeking the Soul is hard-ridden with less than 3/8 to go, and Mongolian Groom running a good race. He's in cruise control thus far. McKenzie gets his cue and comes after him, trying to collar. On the far outside, Seeking the Soul is getting a piece of things, and Draft Pick is down at the rail. McKenzie right up to Mongolian Groom at the top of the stretch. Mongolian Groom digging in very gamely. McKenzie is a half length behind him, and Mongolian Groom kicks on smartly inside the final 1/8 of a mile. McKenzie is all out, but today belongs to Mongolian Groom. It's Mongolian Groom, wire to wire in the Awesome again under Abel Cedillo. McKenzie settles for second. Higher Power